Well, I think maybe for the interest of the people, it would be interesting to talk about how my path a little bit to this. So I was always interested in the arts and being creative, and but I also was very interested in um, connecting with people in general, not just in my sphere. I grew up in a very homogeneous culture, not exposed to a lot. So I was really interested in art, but also as a way of connecting and helping people. Um, so I began as an artist, and then living in New York, I saw what the art world was like, and I knew that was not for me because it only connected to a small realm of people, and I wasn't connecting to the people that I wanted to. Uh, so I eventually ended up back in social work school, and I graduated as a social worker, and also I got my degree in public health. Through all this, I also had a practice of yoga, meditation, but kind of not as serious. But it was something I was always interested in too, and saw the benefits of. But I also, when I was an artist, I began teaching older adults art, and then I realized that that's who I love to be around is older adults. Perhaps because I'm the oldest grandchild, and I was always surrounded by older adults, but I just always loved being around older adults. So I ended up working in a nursing home as a social worker. This was, in my later mid-years. I was probably around 50 at the time, and I realized that there was a lot of chronic unresolved pain, chronic conditions that wasn't being not just physically addressed, but even emotionally addressed, that there was a certain, like, turning away from the pain or the suffering because, at that time, the medical model was very much to fix, and, chronic things cannot be fixed. So then I heard about Kabat-Zinn's work, and I really, thought this is the kind of approach I'm looking for, so that helping people to learn to live with the pain, and that's, of course, how he started his work. So but, of course, I'm working in a nursing home, and the population is frail because that's why they're there, and they might have physical frailties, but also cognitive, a lot of that, and so the practices, the kind of, intensive practices that, typical mindfulness or MBSR, offers would be not appropriate to ask people to do. However, I still felt they could benefit. So I started there. And then I just, started running groups, and um, I saw what worked and what didn't work, and also, I took what I knew about older adults and applied that. So I know that you have to make sure they can hear and see you. I mean, that's something we take for granted in a regular group, but you have to make sure they're, if they can't hear you talk loudly, you have to, if they can't see you, you have to describe things. If they're cognitively impaired, they may not understand words, but they might understand, if you say take a breath and you put your hands here, they might and demonstrate, then they would understand that, right? So I just kept adapting and adapting, and as I often say, there's no formula because you have to see who's in front of you, and then you meet that person, right? Um, so I guess I could say that's how I ended up here after many years of practice, and then, of course, wanting. I guess also another turning point for me was when I realized that I was working with older adults who were in a home and they needed help. They were dependent on others for care partners for their help. And when I realized that the care partners were incredibly stressed and that that would be felt by the people they were caring for, you know. And so I thought, well, maybe, and they spent a lot more time with their care partners than they would spend with me in a 1 hour group. So I thought, well, if I could teach the care partners some of these practices that help us cope with stress, then they might have, it might be easier for them to uh, manage their stress and not convey so much stress. So then, and then also some of the skills that they could practice with the elders together to
Mm.
help them with that.
About what you just mentioned about how they perceive the stress of the care partner. Um, it seems that for people, for example, who have dementia or neurological disease, they relate a lot about what they perceive from people, even the unspoken, even if they
Yes,
don't understand the speech or words.
definitely. Yes, yes. But they understand. They understand.
Yes.
You know, I learned from my grandparents too as they aged. My grandmother had dementia, and you know, when my father died before she did, she lived longer than my father did, and then she would ask where that nice man was. So she didn't remember that this was her son-in-law, but she remembered he was a nice man. So, you know, that's
Mm.
what matters, right? Is
Yes,
that,
yes.
you know, and I think we all do in a way, you know, we can sense if somebody's care. But the other piece of all of that is too, is that the fact that these older adults are dependent on their care partners. So it's a in a way, it's like a survival for them. So if you have a care partner who's not happy with providing
Mm.
the care, it's hard enough to ask for help.
Yeah.
But if the care partner has, for whatever reason, not even related to the older adult,
Mm.
is
Mm.
conveying that they're upset, that's going to be a much harder thing to accept getting the care.
When did you start it exactly to provide this kind of care with mindfulness?
Probably in the middle 90s.
Middle 90s.
Yeah. So what is that? 30 years ago? Time goes by, doesn't it? Yeah, and, yeah, a lot of growing and learning, and I was lucky to have a supervisor because I had a full-time job, and this was just something I did, you know,
Mhm.
on my time, but she also supported me in this, so, in a place that was supportive of this, so I was lucky for that. Yeah.
So the MBEC program
Mhm.
you developed over the years,
Yeah.
and at one point you decided, well, you not decided, but you feel that the program is complete, that you can really provide something or teach it to others.
Not really. I did a lot of presenting. So I'd go
Mm.
to conferences and I'd talk about what I did, and I'd talk whenever people asked me to talk about it. And that was a really interesting thing that happened too, because you know, growing up, for the first half of my life, I was, as they say, the person who would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. I was the one who was terrified of speaking. Terrified. I mean, really.
Mm.
And I had this idea of myself that I couldn't do it. And then, of course, what we discover through mindfulness and a practice of meditation is that we don't have to be the person that we kind of that idea of no self, or that our self can change and grow, and so and then I was very passionate about this. So I give a lot of presentations, and I did write some articles. So I was writing articles for academic journals about this, but then I was approached by a publisher, and I didn't even call it MBEC then. I just called it, you know, mindfulness for frail elders. And
Mm.
but you know, that idea made sense because at the time, you know, it was so. I really always felt that my grounding was not only in Kabat-Zinn's MBSR program, which was so brilliant, but I'd always like say, well, what is the essence of what I'm trying to bring? And the essence is awareness and compassion, right? The two wings of the bird. That's what you know, so whenever couldn't figure out, because I had to invent, and you still do, there's no manual for what I do. It's more just like, well, what is the situation here and what is needed here to bring awareness and compassion to this moment?
So you base yourself on your mindfulness experience, personal experience, your knowledge as a carer for elderly people.
Right. So the two things
And the
together.
two things
Yeah.
coming together.
Right. Right. Right.
How did this connection with the elderly patients, elderly, I don't know if we say patients, I don't know what word to use exactly, but elderly people who are in need of care, this daily interaction with them influence your own practice?
It is my practice.
It's
You
your
know,
practice.
it's well. I'll talk about it later today, but the five remembrances are what I would practice that as part of my practice too, and then I couldn't. It's right in front of me all the time at my work too. Um, so I don't know how to separate that.
Can you describe it to the five remembers?
Well, I shall grow old, right? When I started this, I wasn't as old, but then, of course, every day I'm growing older, so I shall grow old. So acknowledging that, I think that's one reason, and I think it does concern me that a lot of people don't want to, think about that. We have a culture that avoids thinking about this, right? And then, of course, they avoid interacting with people who are older or avoid, seeing that that could be them. I think it's quite frightening for some people, especially people with, when you're working with people with dementia. But to acknowledge I shall grow old, that person I'm with is me, just older. And then to see the person in there, like my grandmother always used to say, I still feel like a young girl inside. And when I was a teenager, I'd look at her like, really? But now I know I'm that old person who says I still feel like who I was, and I am still who I was. So, and then I shall become ill. Yeah. I had some health crises, especially with my second pregnancy, and my daughter was quite sick. So, that came to me early. Some people are lucky enough not to have that. And then my father died quite young. So, um, I guess these things really made me see not that it happens. Somehow if we don't have that, we still feel like we have this invisible protection with us. But so I shall become ill. Yeah. And what's happening now is that more and more people are having not just one illness as we age, but two or three chronic conditions, not conditions that can be fixed. So things that we need to learn to live with, not just pain, but disability, cognitive loss. How do we live with these things, right? I shall lose everything dear and precious to me. I had a lot of losses when I was in my 20s, and I found that out young, so perhaps, but I also saw it with older adults, and I think that's really important to acknowledge because when it happens to you, you feel like all sorts of things, they shouldn't happen. Why did it happen to me?
Yeah.
But these practices help us see that it happens to everybody.
Mm. We often people took it as a punishment.
Yes, punishment. I did something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's quite profound to me. And, I saw when you go into a nursing home, you lose pretty much everything. They You're put in a space that is not your home. Maybe you can bring a few things, but you lose most of your favorite things, You may have lost your friends because they're gone. You may have lost your ability to do things you used to do. Um, so yeah, illness, loss, this is what I saw every day. I saw people come into the nursing home and like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And then I had to think like, well, didn't you think something was going to happen? But, again, if you don't think of every don't, so I think that's why they think the five remembrances are such an important practice. And then, of course, I shall die, you know, working with death and being present for death. So how can we be present for
Mm.
that experience.
Mm.
We have such I think it's getting better. You know, we make so much around birth, but there is another side to birth, is it?
The
You
end
know,
of the story.
right. So I don't know if they have that here, but in the United States, they have a doula. Do you have doulas here? Doulas are a woman, or could be a man, but usually a woman who sits with somebody, a woman giving birth.
Yeah.
Not to provide medical attention, but just to give water, to give comfort, to give words, whatever that woman needs. So that's called a birth doula.
Okay.
But then they started training people to be death doulas because why? I think the two things that people are most afraid of in death is pain and being alone.
Mm.
So these death doulas sit with people while they're in that process, and they don't provide medical help, but they provide support, chocolate ice
Mhm.
cream, whatever it is that
Yeah.
the person wants. So to be present for that, I think we're getting a little better at it now with the palliative care and, of course, what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did with looking at death. So I think we're better with it, but still, I think it's a practice. We want to do things. We want to make things better, and
Yes.
sometimes there's nothing to do except to be present
Exactly.
and
Yes.
witness, and that's a really important thing.
Yes.
And this is what mindfulness allows us
Mm.
to do, to be a witness to suffering.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Simply
was very
present.
lucky. I saw both my parents die,
Mm.
and they were surrounded by their children, and they, again, they taught me a lot through that. I learned a lot, especially my father, since he died when I was so young, when I was only 30. And he he was very graceful through it, and that helped me a lot to be not so fearful. And then, of course, I'm heir to my actions. That I mean, that kind of helped me with older adults, but also with myself. I mean, such a way of looking at the world. It helps take the judgment and the blame and the harshness away from life when
Mm.
you just say, "Oh, this has happened because this happened." Right? And then you kind of see it in a more neutral way. Oh, it's almost scientific. I always think of these teachings as very scientific in a way and
Mhm.
brilliant because Western medicine, we think we invented everything. And here these practices come and tell us like, no, you have it all inside you. And, these teachings are
Yes.
so
Mm.
important. So we are heir to our actions. And, again, I saw a lot of, because I worked as a social worker with older adults, I heard a lot of stories and I saw a lot of stories and how life played out for so many different people.
Mm.
For example, when people were admitted to the nursing home, for some people, this was the worst thing that could have ever happened to them. And then usually they made it the worst thing, and then other people thought, well, maybe not my choice, but, there's things here that are benefiting me. And it wasn't so bad for them. And I thought, like, it's the same place,
Yes.
but how they worked with that, how they viewed it. So we're heir to like how that's
Mm.
one
Mm.
example that it helped me of just acknowledging that life is kind of what we make of it sometimes, and how we choose to how we understand it. But we have to have these skills because we live in such a reactive society, and if you never pause to reflect, then you don't get that opportunity to see what else is the other options of being in your life.
It's this word reactive society. It's so beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for using
Yeah,
this term.
yeah,
That's very
yeah,
bizarre. Yeah.
yeah.
So could you give some hints, some advice for, we have many people who are practicing mindfulness who are around 70 years old or taking care of elderly parents. Could you give some advice about how they could deal with that based from their mindfulness practice?
Mhm. Yeah, I think Of course, it's such a wonderful opportunity to care for people, but it can also be incredibly draining.
Mm.
And many of these people may also have other responsibilities,
Yes,
jobs, or children in
exactly.
their lives that they're caring for. So this feeling of being stretched and never enough time. And I think the most important thing is to realize if we don't take care of ourselves, we will burn out. Right, that's just a fact. You'll burn out, and it is so predominant among caregivers that the burnout. It can be health problems. There's a lot of research about the health problems that caregivers have, and but also even just again, we talked about that stress. You know, you're caring for someone, and you're caring for them, and then at some point you might say, I told you this 12 times already, you know, today is Monday. And, you know, that's a very natural reaction, but we're going to have it more if we don't take care of ourselves. So the practices that I've found the caregivers received the best was compassion. And Kristen Neff, I don't know if you've seen her work, but she does a lot. And Christopher Germier, the mindful self-compassion. I really introduced that a lot more, especially with caregivers now, because I think, again, it's a harsh culture we live in, a very judgmental, harsh culture. And I just see it over and over again with people. They know that they should take care of themselves, but not now. I'm too busy now. Right. So it's partly to do I introduce a lot of short practices, the 3-minute breathing space, stop, you know, short mountain pose. So there are different practices we can do that way, but also self-compassion. Self-compassion, even just putting your hand on your heart. May I take care of myself? She has a self-compassion break that I love, right? That first we acknowledge this is hard. But people skip that part sometimes.
Yes.
Like, oh, it's like we have to, and this is the mindful part. I'm suffering now, right? The same kindness we give to the person we're caring for, to give it to
Mm.
ourselves, right? But then also to realize the second part of it is to realize I'm not alone in my suffering. Suffering can feel very lonely. So to connect with other caregivers, maybe be in a group of supportive caregivers, right? To, but even just to acknowledge, if you look around, other people suffer. I'm not alone. And then may I be kind to myself. So to find practices, the metta practice or whatever practice. It could
Mm.
be just giving yourself a hug, giving yourself a pat on the back. Thank you. You're doing a good job. You're doing the best you can.
This is the most difficult part, actually, this self-compassion, self-kindness in a society where it might be judged as weakness or self-pity,
Hmm. Yeah.
or be too much indulged with your own suffering,
Right.
all the
Right.
judgment. And
Right. Right. Or maybe there's also the idea that, like, if we stop being hard on ourselves, then we're going to not accomplish
yes,
anything.
yes.
I know I'm laughing but it's true. People feel like if
Mm.
I don't really, be hard on myself, I won't do my best.
Also, in the context of institution where the requirement, the number of hours and work increase and the number of staff decrease.
Yes,
So the people are asked to really give a maximum of
I
what they
know.
can. And
I think it's impossible. And there were times I felt that honestly, I couldn't even do an adequate job and that was heartbreaking. We don't go in this work, of caring for others to have our hearts broken. Well, in a way we do, but to, to put ourselves in that position is so difficult.
is there anything you would like to add? Or-
No, I think we need to change how we interact with each other, but of course there are bigger things we need to change, how we provide care, to think ahead
Mhm.
that, we have this population that is growing exponentially. And they're not living longer, just living longer, but living longer with multiple chronic conditions. And the biggest chronic condition that is coming is dementia. And dementia is the hardest to care for because it requires a lot of people care. I mean, there are some AI or other ways that we can deal with it, but it's, unless you lock someone in a room, I mean, you have to have somebody watch people usually with dementia. So, that's going to require a lot of people care. And we need you,
I think
the next generation.
yes, I think it's going to be one of the biggest boom in professional
Yeah.
care.
But people still aren't going into it,
No.
Although I think it's a little better in social work school, I hope, because that's where the jobs are.
Yes.
Yeah. Even though they're cutting back, there's still jobs. Anyway, I hope this is helpful.
But thank you very much,
Yeah,
Lucia,
thank you.
because of sharing your experience
Thank you.
and taking this aspect of awareness and compassion together. I think this is a key point for
Thank
everything
you.
we are doing, but I
Right.
think for this population, it's very
Yes.
important.
And it's, you really have to be, I think, creative to think about but I think with all of what we do is creative, but this is even more creative because,
Yes.
Yeah.
I will confess something. My mother is 84 years old, and I know that sometimes I'm not passionate enough. I know
Of
I'm not
course.
kind enough.
Of
But
course.
I realize also it's such a mirror, to see, because she's still very bright in the mind. The body is more difficult, week by week, month by month. But also, acknowledge this very bright person, everything she has accomplished in her life, everything she has been doing, and to see now how difficult things are. It's a very
is.
profound teaching
Yeah.
for myself.
Yeah. And, that's what I saw every day. So I could say, what do I want for myself? I have time to choose because I started doing this work when I was 50. I'm 78 now. And, I have time to choose about it. And if my 50s, how I want to age.
Thank
But
you.
it goes quickly.
Yes, it goes very quick. We feel it, isn't it? I was
The sense of humor, though, that really, if I say
Yes.
age, it's great.
Yes.
Don't take myself so seriously. Lighter and laugh with life. And also with people with dementia. I love to laugh with people with dementia.
Yes, this is something we forgot actually, that humor and laughing is
Yes.
still there
Yeah,
for them.
yeah. And it's just about the connection,
Yes.
feeling that connection. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your interest and anything I can do to support it, I will.
Thank you so much.